I'd like to start by introducing our first speaker for today, Stephanie Wicker. Stephanie is a child behaviour expert. She's a parenting educator and counsellor. She's worked in lots of different fields with kids. So she's been everything from a preschool teacher to a special needs therapist. And her aim is to help parents and carers have strong connections with their children, and all her work is through evidence-based research programs, so you can really trust what she says. She's talking on the subject of toddler wrangling, tips for tackling challenging behaviour. Does that sound like something anyone in this room is interested in? And this topic is presented by the Green Elephant Early Learning Centre, so could we please welcome Stephanie to the stage?
Thank you. Okay. All right, good morning. So I'm Stephanie Wicker. Thank you, Siobhan, for that introduction. And thank you to all the amazing women behind the scenes that you guys don't see right now who have been working very hard to make today an amazing event. Oh, should I know something? Anyway, I do wander around a bit, so if I find it squeaking, I'll just come back over here. Anyway, so today we're going to be talking about toddler behavior. So the first thing that I want to do is kind of get an idea, how do you guys feel about your toddler's behavior currently? So, okay. So do you feel like it's a little bit unreasonable sometimes? Raise your hand if you think your toddler's a little unreasonable. Can I raise? Yes, you can raise. Stand up. No, I'm just kidding. All right, so what about maybe a little bit uncooperative? Raise your hand if you think your toddler sometimes, maybe when it's bath time, maybe when it's time to get dressed, they just run away. Okay, so what about maybe a little bit defiant sometimes? Have they learned no yet? Okay, so still a little early. So I see some of you guys aren't raising your hands for that one. And that's because around 14 to 18 months, that's when children really start to explore language. And that's when they're going to start learning the power of the word no. Okay, so they're starting to get a feel for like, what gives me empowerment? Where is my control lie? Where does my parents' control lie? Anyway, good luck with that. Okay, all right, so the first thing that we've got to talk about with behavior is always going to begin and end with brain development. So one of the ways that it was explained to me years ago when I was still a preschool teacher, and I've taken this with me to all of the classes that I've given because it's awesome. So it's the example of the brain. So my hand represents the brainstem. And right here, you see my tattoo? There's actually a purpose for it now. It's the brainstem right here, okay? All right, so this is where the fight, flight, and freeze response is stored, okay? Now when I fold my thumb over like this represents the midbrain. The midbrain is where we have all of our memories and feelings of discouragement and emotions. It's the emotional, reactive brain. A lot of people refer to it as the primal brain. All right, now when I fold my fingers over like this represents the prefrontal cortex. Okay, this is where we do reasoning, problem solving, all of our executive functioning skills lies in the prefrontal cortex. Now the reason I'm talking about this, like who cares? You guys should care, okay? Because as adults, we've learned how to use our prefrontal cortex to solve simple problems. So when we experience a stressor, in health psychology, a stressor is anything that interrupts the expectations of the brain. So, I spilled coffee on my shirt. That's a stressor, all right? You're stuck in traffic, that's a stressor. Now, automatically, what happens is what psychologists refer to as flipping your lid. And now your emotional brain comes forward and it starts making all of your decisions. Now, the greatest thing about being an adult is that we have a fully developed prefrontal cortex, which means that we can rely on this to kick back in and to help us through that problem, right? That makes sense, right? For your toddler, however, they have a very underdeveloped prefrontal cortex compared to yours, which means that when they experience a stressor, they're probably already in this primal state of thinking. So now imagine that you're emotional and reactive, and on top of that, you've spilled coffee on your shirt. How much harder would that be? Let's say that you've had an argument with your spouse or your partner, and now you spill coffee on your shirt. It amplifies the problem, doesn't it? Everything becomes 10 times worse when we're in that emotional reactive state. That is kind of like how your toddler is all the time, okay? So that's why what happens when they experience a stressor, they're already in a flipped lid state, and it triggers the brainstem, and this is where the fight, flight, and freeze response is stored. So what do you think that looks like? What do you guys think happens when your child experiences a stressor and it goes to the brainstem? What is that word? A tantrum, guys, come on. A tantrum, defiance, aggression, all of those things that become so disruptive when we want to have a strong connection with our child, right? So it's good to understand what's going on in the brain. So the reason that I'm talking about that is I'm going to be sharing with you guys a few things that we can start focusing on now in order to support them understanding how that development works, okay? And I know that I'm talking really quickly. We've got a lot to cover in a really short amount of time. I have someone out the back being like, this is how many minutes you got left. So no pressure, but I'm gonna blow your minds with how amazing this stuff is, okay? All right, so these are some very common stressors that you might experience with your kids. It might be something like, oh, they don't wanna do something. We all know what that's like. Get in the bath and they run the other way laughing. We all know what that's like. All right, what about they want it right now? They want something, but we can't have any, you know, there's no chocolate in the house and I'd have to go to the store, so no, you can't have it. And we all know what that's like, right? Okay, a very common stressor, the last one here, is they want your attention. It's time to go to work. You can't stick around. I'm sorry, but I gotta go, and they're just like, dragging on your leg. Okay, so these are very common situations that your child will experience that will evoke that stressor in their brain. These are also the functions behind all behavior. There's a few missing because we don't really need to go through all of them. I don't have time, but these are the key features to know. So if you want to understand the motivation behind your child's behavior, these are going to be the main functions, okay? Just something to be mindful of. All right, so the first thing that I'm going to share with you, that believe me, if you incorporate these 3 tips that I'm going to be sharing before we get into tantrums, that's how much I'm going to be talking about. If you can use these 3 things on a daily basis, they will radically change your home. All right, not only are you going to have children who feel connected to you and your relationship is stronger than ever, but on top of that, they're going to understand the benefits of cooperation. And ultimately, that is our goal. Our goal is not to control their behavior, it's to empower their behavior. Okay, so the first thing is asking questions. So why is asking questions a small step towards big results? Isn't that catchy? I made that up. Doesn't that sound good? That sounds good, right? Come on. Okay, all right, so basically what we're talking about here. So remember how we talked about the brain and that emotional reactive state of the brain. The more that we tell an emotional reactive brain what to do, the more it's going to begin to resist us. As your toddler is developing free thinking and independence, they're going to start resisting everything we're saying. One day, they're listening beautifully, and then the next day, all of a sudden, no to everything, right? That is simply because their brain is craving that control. By asking questions, what you're really doing is you are creating a physiological response in the brain to search for an answer. Okay. As soon as the brain, I'm getting excited, but I know you guys aren't because you don't know what's coming, but this is awesome. Okay, as soon as the brain starts searching for that answer, guess what it's not doing? It's not resisting you anymore. This is one of the most amazing strategies that I teach my families and educators, by the way. I use this in a lot of preschools when I'm visiting a daycare. We start asking those questions, make them feel relevant, make them feel involved. And what you'll find is even if your child is already in a flip-lid state, which most of the time they're going to be if they're a toddler, for example, what you'll find is it'll start to stimulate their prefrontal cortex and they're going to stop resisting as much. So let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. Okay, so how often do you say, all right, put your hat on, it's time to go outside? We might simply just say, what do you need on your head so you can go outside? All right, what do you need to wear so you stay warm outside? It's really cold. What do we need to do with our hands? We've been playing with the dog and now it's time to eat. What do you think we should do? Okay, by giving them an opportunity to solve a simple problem, you're going to find that their cooperation immediately increases. Just by asking a simple question. And if this becomes part of your day-to-day routines, you are going to find a massive change in behavior. So if your child is resisting you and running away, the first thing to do is incorporate more questions. Okay, I wish I could talk about this more, but I only have a few minutes. Okay, so I'm going to be going through these all quickly. If you guys have questions, you're like, I want to know more about that one because that didn't really make sense, or maybe I didn't explain it very well, then just come chat with me because I love talking about this stuff. So the next one is starting simple and working your way towards a harder demand. So basically what we're looking at here is high probability versus low probability instructions. I know, what am I talking about? I know that I'm using a lot of terms, but the reason why is because this stuff is really cool and I want to share the science a little bit, but hopefully I'm explaining it okay. So a high probability demand is something that your child is very likely to do. Like, come give me a high five. Kids love giving high fives. So that there's a good chance they're going to do it. A low probability is exactly what it sounds like, and it means that there's a lower chance that your child's going to listen. So maybe something like, let's get dressed and go to school. Maybe something like, Let's leave the playground. Ooh, that's a big one. Who struggles leaving birthday parties and playgrounds and events? Yeah, girl, you know what I'm talking about. Yeah, so it's hard, right? So that's a low probability demand. So what you want to do in order to boost your child's cooperation and obedience is you want to start simple. Rather than just diving in and giving them this big demand that's difficult for them to cope with. Remember, they're already in a reactive state of the brain, so we want to make sure that we're being mindful of their brain development before we consider our needs. We've got to consider theirs, because what happens is they start to feel more empowered the moment that we remember, oh, that's right, they're having a hard time right now, so what can I do? Okay, so we start simple. All right, so making sure I've covered all my points. We're good, okay. And this allows your child the opportunity to experience the benefits of cooperation. So let me give you a quick example. Last week, I was working with a family, and they have a 3.5-year-old son who, tell me if this sounds like your son or your daughter, this child has never successfully, completely cleaned up their own mess, okay? So whenever there's Lego all over the floor, getting him to clean up his mess is just always drama, always. So the family's like, you know what? We're gonna leave that. We're just gonna leave that there. And they've started to just clean up the mess for him. Now, of course, this is generalized into other areas, and there's other areas where he's a little bit non-cooperative, right? But cleaning up is the big one. So we've had a couple of phone consultations. I'd given them all these strategies and ideas, and they were like, look, I think we just need to see you do it. So can you come over and can you show us how to do this? So that's what I did. So I went and I visited their house, and I'm like, all right, today's the day. It's my first time meeting your son, but I'm gonna get him to clean up this entire mess, and it's gonna be fun, and it's gonna be quick, all right? So that's what I did. The first thing was diving in with a small demand. Remember, I didn't have a strong relationship with him. I'd never met him before. So I don't have the leg up that you guys would have. You're moms and dads, you know these kids better than anybody else. So you guys are already in it. That connection is already strong, so kids are much more likely to listen, right? So anyway, so I had to get to know him really quickly in a really short amount of time, but I just got on the floor and started playing with him. By asking just a few questions and taking interest in his interests, I found that we connected fast enough for me to start placing some small demands. I was like, hey, what color is this Lego? Yeah, that's right, it's blue. Can I get a high five? You are so clever. And what about that? What animal is that? It's a horse. And what sound does a horse make? Really simple questions, taking interest in his interests, and he started answering them really quickly. And what I saw is that he started watching me, all right? They start looking at you. They're waiting for that next question, and that means that I'm in the position to start placing some higher demands. So that's what we watch for. How strong is that connection? And sure enough, I was like, all right, can you put 3 yellow Lego in that box? Oh my goodness, you are so clever. What about the 5 blue ones? Sure enough, he was packing away. The mom and dad are like, what's happening? He's cleaning. And because I broke it down into small steps, I started simple and I worked my way towards harder. By the end of it, maybe 2 minutes, 3 minutes at the most, I was like, look, mate, let's just clean the rest of this up and let's go chew some books. And sure enough, without even thinking, happiest little kid in the world, just cleaning up his mess. Okay, so that just shows you the power of starting simple and working towards harder by combining those high probability and low probability demands, all right? Who's gonna use that? Come on, that's good. That's good stuff. Yeah, okay, that's what I'm talking about. All right, so the last thing that I wanna talk about before we go into tantrums is why and how to avoid unnecessary stressors. This is something that we are all guilty of, okay? So some common stressors for kids is saying things like no, not now, right? Anything like that. How often do we use the word no? And I know, I'm so guilty of this too. I'm constantly saying no, and I have to track my own, have I said that too many times today? I probably have. And you'll notice it too, because you'll say no over things that are actually a good thing. It's actually good. No, we're not going to the playground because we're gonna go see a movie. And they're like, all they've heard was no. So they're like, nah, right? Am I alone in this? Come on, guys, right? Okay, so this is a big stressor for children, is hearing no and not now. So what we want to do is be mindful that they're already in that emotional reactive state, and we try to avoid unnecessary stressors. And the way that we do this is we replace no with a contingency. Now, I am not saying to stop saying no to your kids. That is not sustainable, and that is absolutely not the message here. But what you want to start doing is just being mindful with how often you're saying it and how often it's actually possible to stay on the same page and remain allies with your child while still getting things done. And the way to do it is a contingency. A great example of a contingency is a first then statement. Who's heard of a first then statement or a when then statement? Yes, okay, so some of you guys have already heard of this. This is one of the most effective ways that we can boost cooperation and obedience while still getting things done on our own terms. A great example is, let's say that your toddler really wants to read a story. But unfortunately, it's time to take your older brother, the preschooler, to school, and your toddler needs to get in the car right now. But they really want to read the story. Rather than being like, no, I told you 100 times we are getting in the car. That's the temptation, right? Our temptation, that innate drive in us to control and dominate their behavior. What I want you to do is be a little bit more creative. Give yourself a couple seconds to think of a strategy, okay? And if you remain calm in the moment, you'll actually find that this comes naturally over time. Instead of saying, no, not now, we're gonna say something like, sure, you can read a book. First, let's get into the car seat, and then you can choose a story. And then you grab the books and you take them to the car, and your child's like, I want the books, and they'll follow you, right? So you can use their motivation to create a roadmap for them. Okay? And this gives them a clear way of getting their needs met while still getting your needs met without evoking that unnecessary stressor. So does that make sense? I know I'm talking really quickly, but is this stuff making sense to you guys? All right, cool. All right, awesome. You guys are great. Okay, so the last thing that I want to talk about, and I don't know how I'm doing on time. I was supposed to have my timer somewhere. Yes. Oh my goodness, I'm doing amazing. Okay, well, let's talk about tantrums. I can slow down. I have been talking so quickly up here thinking I gotta get out of here. Awesome, okay, all right. So who wants to talk about tantrums a little bit? Yeah, you do, yeah, you do. There's 2 tables in the back not raising their hand at all. I know you're lying. I know you guys wanna hear about tantrums. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. All right, so, I was thinking about tantrums the other week, and in order to get myself in the right state of mind, I decided to go into some Facebook groups and to ask some moms and dads what are the most unreasonable reasons that their toddlers had a tantrum. Okay, now I've been working with children and families for 15 years. I think that I've seen it all, but apparently not. I thought that I'd seen it all, but some of the stories that I was hearing. So raise your hand if you feel like you can relate to these families, okay? The first one is my toddler tantrum today because I looked at him. Who feels like you can relate to that? Okay, all right. The next one, these get wilder, okay? So today my toddler tantrumed because he couldn't sit in the oven while I was cooking dinner. I'm not even making this up. These are real stories from families. And then the last one's my absolute favorite unreasonable reason for a tantrum ever. And it was that today my toddler tantrumed because the cat would not unlock the door and let us inside. This is awesome! I love this. But it makes sense when you think about where their brain development is. Remember, that's why they're so unreasonable, because they're already in that emotional reactive state. So the cat not answering the door to us might not seem like a big deal, but for them that was enough to trigger their brainstem. How crazy is that? So now that we can kind of understand what's going on in the brain, it helps us be a little bit more empathetic, a little bit more calm in the moment, because we realize, oh wait, this isn't intentional. My child's not trying to drive me crazy, right? No, they're not. They're genuinely having a hard time right now. Okay, so these are 3 things that I want you to remember the next time that your toddler is having a tantrum. Who is ready to hear the secret ingredient to soothing tantrums? Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay, all right, the first thing, and probably the hardest thing, is this is the moment to be your child's pillar of calm. I made that up too, pillar of calm. Doesn't that sound nice? Come on guys, that's soothing. All right, the reason that we need to be mindful of how calm we are is because our toddler does not have the ability to soothe themselves, right? They don't have that prefrontal cortex like we do. So it's up to us to be their self-soother. We are literally coaching them. I love referring to this as emotional coaching. We are emotionally coaching your child through that tantrum. So the first thing is remaining calm, as hard as it is. The louder and the more that behavior is escalating, the calmer and soother we should be. I know that's not as easy as it sounds, but it totally works. As a matter of fact, there's some families in here who I've introduced this with, and I've heard some amazing results, and I'll share that in a minute. Okay, so that's the first thing, is to remain really calm. The second thing is to be mindful that this is a time for validation only. I know the temptation is to be like, what are you on, look at him, right? And to give it all this attention and stuff and to be really reactive sometimes. What's more than that is we might think this is the time to teach. This is the time to lecture. No, it's not. It is time to bite your tongue, okay? When your child is in this emotional responsive state, all they need from you is one simple sentence. And this is my go-to. It's almost like a mantra because it makes me calmer while still making them calm. And it's, I know this is hard. I know this is hard. That's it. That's all I'm going to say. The whole tantrum. I am not talking about when your child is being disobedient. Just to be clear, I'm not talking about when your child is being defiant or nagging you. I am talking about a tantrum, guys, when they have lost the plot. There's no return, okay? They are in that fight, flight, freeze response. This is the moment where we choose one sentence and we stick with it. This way we don't get into the habit of talking too much and, right? That gets in the way sometimes. And we accidentally feed into that energy and make the tantrum last longer than it needs to, okay? So we choose one sentence and that's our go-to. Now the final thing that I'm gonna share with you, it's amazing. This is amazing, right? Okay, all right, because this is really cool stuff. Okay, the last thing I'm going to share with you is how to teach your child how to self-regulate. Now, guys, this is, if you take nothing away from today, but your concern is about tantrums, then you're going to want to start using this very simple technique to teach your child the early stages of self-regulation, remembering where their brain is currently at. Remember how they're in that primal reactive emotional state. If I tell a toddler, okay, can we count down from 5? Can we blow into a hot cup? Look, I love that stuff. It's wonderful for 4-year-olds, but for toddlers, no way. They don't get it. They don't follow along. They're too emotional. They don't hear what you're saying. So instead, we guide them through our own breathing. Okay? So when you're a toddler, the next time they're having a tantrum, you're remaining calm, you're choosing a go-to sentence, and now, as soon as they're screaming, they're crying, they're so upset, they might be scratching and hitting, I've seen it all, okay? So whatever behavior's happening, I just want you to remain nice and calm, nice and quiet. And when it escalates, what's gonna happen is inevitably, every child is gonna reach the same moment in a tantrum where they have to catch their breath. Who knows what I'm talking about? Who knows what I'm talking about? Yeah, so they have to catch their breath. Okay, sorry I keep touching. Sorry, anyway, I'm not very good with microphones. Anyway, so they have to catch their breath, right? So that is when we are gonna jump in, we're gonna cuddle them and hold them close and give them a squeeze, and use that sentence, I know this is hard, okay? And the reason this is the perfect moment for it is they're catching their breath. That means they're not hitting you, they're not scratching you, they're not screaming, they're breathing. That's all they're doing. This is the perfect time to start to reinforce that deep breathing. And that is where regulation comes from. Physiological self-regulation is where it begins. Okay, so give them about 20 seconds and guess what? They're gonna come out of it and they're gonna come out swinging. Okay, so stand back up. Okay, you don't wanna get hit, you don't wanna get scratched, just stand up, remain calm, act as if everything is perfect, and allow them to scream again, that's fine. They're safe, they're secure. Let them go at it. That is absolutely fine. We're just gonna wait. We're gonna calmly wait for them to reach the point where they gotta catch their breath again, okay? And what you'll do is every time your child starts to catch their breath, you dive in with that big amount of reinforcement, that big amount of cuddling. Okay, now the reason why this works, because I know this sounds like, what? When you put all these 3 pieces together and you do it consistently, every time my toddler is tantruming, I'm remaining calm. I'm choosing that one sentence, so I'm not talking too much, I'm not overreacting, I'm not rolling my eyes and huffing and puffing and complaining to my husband, right? I am just remaining calm. I've got my go-to sentence for when I need to talk, all right, which makes me calmer. And lastly, I'm using that sentence in extra cuddles every time my child catches their breath. Now what you are gonna find, and there's a lot going on behind the scenes here, but we don't have time to get into what is going on in the brain during this moment, but what you're doing is you are stimulating all those good chemicals, all those feel-good chemicals whenever they breathe. And what's gonna happen is your toddler, when they're angry and upset, they're gonna remember, okay? Because it's all stored in the brain, and they're gonna remember, oh, what felt good? It felt good to breathe. And they're gonna start returning to it. And what you'll find is you might have a tantrum that lasts for 25 or 30 minutes. I've worked with some families who've had, children with tantrums for 45 minutes and self-harm and all of these issues. So this stuff is incredibly effective no matter, how old your child is if they're still having tantrums or how intense the tantrum is. Either way, it's gonna work. And it might start out as a 20, 30-minute tantrum, maybe a 10-minute tantrum, and then over time, it's gonna lose that length, right? The duration is gonna start to go down. So it might be a 5-minute tantrum, might be a 2-minute tantrum. I've worked with some families who have children who had a tantrum for, I don't know, at least 45 minutes when we timed it. It was horrible. It was heartbreaking. I feel teary. It was heartbreaking watching these children really struggle because they didn't have the regulation skills and the family didn't quite know what to do. So we introduced this technique, okay? Super simple, 3 steps. That's all you gotta do. And sure enough, within 3 days, I get emotional whenever I talk about this because I think about the impact that this makes on families' lives, because when kids are happier and feeling better, life just becomes so much easier, doesn't it? I can't help getting emotional about it, sorry about that. But anyway, after 3 days, this little boy specifically, that's why I get emotional because I think about a specific child, he went from self-harm and making himself sick and hurting others, all the way down to just letting out like a quick squeal. A quick squeal. We can live with that, can't we? That's okay. A quick scream or a squeal and then he's coping again, that's awesome. All because we introduced this technique and we stuck with it. So even though it's hard the first few times, you'll get better at it with practice. So anyway, so I hope you found that helpful. What we've gone through today is, are you gonna change? Yes, okay. So we talked a little bit about why behavior is so challenging and what is going on in the brain. I know it was a bit of a quick run through, but hopefully it was effective. Then we talked about a few ways that you could boost resilience and overall obedience at home by showing your child the benefits of cooperation. So we talked about asking more questions, starting simple, working towards a harder demand. We talked a little bit about replacing stressors with contingencies, that's right. And then lastly, I gave you just a quick little formula for when your child is tantruming. All right, I hope you found that helpful.
Stay there. We're not letting it go yet. This is the time where you guys can ask Steph any questions. So Denise and Leslie are walking. Leslie's over here. You might not have seen her before, and Denise is over here. So if you have any questions for Stephanie, now's the time to ask her. If anyone, don't be shy. This is your opportunity. Oh, here we go. There's a few up. Who was first? Go up the back. Maybe we'll start with up the back. If you could just mention your name and then ask your question.
My name is Gloria. Thank you very much for your talk. The question I have is, you said with the tantrums about staying calm. How do you stay calm when your toddler loses it and they just stand there and they pretty much bash you and they just keep hitting you and hitting you and hitting you, and you walk up and you walk away, but they chase you and hit you and hit you and hit you? So how do you stay calm? And do you walk away or do you sit on the couch and just cop it?
That's tough.
Do you know?
Okay, so there's a few questions in one question, right? So we're talking about how to remain calm and then how to react. So 2 different things, right? So the first thing remember how we introduced all of those strategies in the beginning, understanding their emotional reactive brain. So we talked about 3 ways to boost that connection and to boost that resilience. Once you've started introducing those 3 things, those by themselves, that's an antecedent approach to behavior. It's just a fancy way of saying before the tantrum happens, we're gonna introduce some life skills like resilience, okay? When you introduce those, you're gonna find that the amount of tantrums and also the intensity of tantrums is gonna naturally start to drop. The more that your child feels relevant and all these kinds of things, and you're meeting all those needs ahead of time. So first, there's that. So that's gonna help. The next thing is that remaining calm, I think remaining calm is all about understanding that behavior is not intentional. I think the reason we get so worked up is because we take it so personal. Why are you hitting me? Don't you love me? I bought you all this food and now you won't eat it. We just take everything as if it's a sign of our relationship. But with toddlers, it's not. With toddlers, that behavior it's reactive, emotional, and it's not personal. But anyway, so I think remaining calm would begin with understanding that that's not a personal attack against you. And then finally, the key thing here is knowing why it's happening. Once we understand the function behind the behavior, remember how we looked at the few stressors at the very beginning? There's always a motivation behind behavior. It might be, I don't want to do something. It might be, I want something right now. It might be, I want your attention, right? But there's always going to be a function behind it. Once we understand and define why the tantrum is happening, I'm getting so close to you, I'm sorry. I forgot you.
I quite like it, it's fine. Keep going.
But once we understand the motivation behind behavior, that is when we can begin to give them the resources and give them the skills that replace the problem behavior. Okay, so maybe your child is having a hard time coping with no. Okay, well, now we have an antecedent approach to that. We're going to start placing more contingencies in. You know, maybe your child is having a hard time playing independently. Maybe you have to be there all the time, so as soon as you walk away, they become reactive. All right, well, let's start building those independent play skills. Once we understand what's behind the behavior, then we can really start to support them by giving them that individual skills. I hope that makes sense. There's 3 quick answers to your question. I know this goes a little bit more in depth than you know, not as in depth, sorry, as you'd probably love. We'll talk later.
Yeah, there's
Come
morning
chat with me.
teas coming up. You can kind of find Steph. And I forgot to tell you, move your hair behind your beautiful long hair behind your shoulders.
Is that what's doing this?
Quite possibly.
You couldn't tell me that like 30 minutes ago.
I should have yelled at you.
I know. Move your hair.
We've got another question over here. And just again, your name, please, and your question.
My name's Rachel, and I actually have 2 questions. So the first one is about saying no. So I know I do say no a lot, but there are some instances where it's not first then, it's flat out no. Like you can't run around the car park by yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can't watch 3 hours of TV. What? You know, so, you know, like, so what do we do in those cases? And the second one is about changing behaviour during pregnancy. So I'm pregnant in the last couple of months, especially. My she's almost 2. She's just become super clingy and a bit of a demon. So, I mean, I can't be carrying her around every second of the day. So, you know, I want to meet her needs as much as possible, but it's not realistic. So, how do I?
Okay, all right, so 2 wonderful questions. If I forget the second one, just remind me. Okay, so, but the first one is when we have to say no. There's going to be times, when, of course, you know, we got to say no. That's all there is to it. What I love about introducing contingencies in first thens is that it's not about replacing no altogether. It's about building your child's ability to cope, to regulate, and to be self-accountable. Okay, so as soon as I start placing contingencies, our child now has a crystal clear roadmap. How do I get what I want while still being on mom's terms? Do you see what that means? That they need to adapt to you. So first, sit down, then we'll read a story. So that is a wonderful way to just practice that self-accountability and being adaptive to other people. And what you're going to find is if you start using those contingencies consistently, and you know, you get your partner, your in-laws, your spouse, whoever else is with you, you get everyone involved sharing those things. Even teachers at the school, I use this a lot in like daycare and preschool staff as well. Very effective way to get quick results from kids is by making them feel like they're part of the conversation, make them feel relevant by using contingencies. Now you guys are both like aiming for the same thing. Right? So you're both on the same page now. What you're going to find is that when the time comes to say no, you've already given them the skills to cope with it. That's what's so amazing about these contingencies. So no, we don't use them all the time. You know, sometimes we got to say no, of course we do. But the better we get at them and the better the child gets at them, when it comes time to absolutely say no, you're actually going to find that your child is way more adaptive. Way more. So even if that was the straight up question, how do I say no to my child? I'd answer the same thing. Do you know what I mean? Like I would say, introduce those contingencies and watch the magic happen. Because it's all about stimulating those areas in the prefrontal cortex. Okay, which is why they're struggling with no, right? Because they're primal reactive. So now that we've been stimulating them, they're getting all that practice, they're getting better at it, and then the time comes for them to flip their lid and they actually cope better. Okay, sorry, I'm trying to do this fast. Your next one was getting your toddler ready for the baby. Is that right? Because you're experiencing maybe an influx in challenging behaviors? Is that what it is? Okay, so, and that makes perfect sense. So, you know, toddlers are smart. And as soon as they realize that there's a baby on the way, then they're going to be reminded of when they were a baby. Sorry, I'm not good with this
even
thing.
your hair,
I know.
Because your heart is right there. And you're
My heart. Yes, that's exactly what it is. Anyway, so they remember what it was like to be a baby and what that one-on-one skin time with mommy was like and how special it was. And I think that's why we actually see an influx in behaviors. It's not so much, a lot of people think that it's like a jealousy thing and, you know, all this kind of stuff. I don't think it goes that deep most of the time. Kids don't have the emotional baggage that we do as adults, let's be honest. Instead, it's just, oh, when I was a baby, I was treated like this, so I'm gonna be a baby again. I'm gonna behave like a baby again. You might even find a 5 or 6-year-old resorting or regressing to those toddler-like behaviors or even baby-like behaviors, you know, sucking on the ends of their hair, right, things like that. We see all these little things coming up again that remind you of a baby. So it's very common, is my point. It's very common what you're seeing is that your toddler might start behaving a little bit more like a baby, so a little bit clingier, expecting a little bit more one-on-one skin time with you than normal. So a great way to prepare your toddler for that upcoming baby, because everything's gonna change, right? very soon. So what I like to do is introducing social stories. And I don't know if you're familiar with what social stories are, but basically it's a way of creating a quick story, a quick snapshot of what's to come. And it primes your toddler's brain so they know what to expect. What are some ways that you can be an awesome older brother or sister? And what's it going to be like to have a baby in the house? And what's mommy going to be like? Do you think she's going to be really tired sometimes? What are some ways that we can help mommy through it? And by simply just talking about these things, and we can do that through stories. Stories are a wonderful, natural way to teach. I know I'm probably answering these way too in depth, but because I don't mean to be taking up all of our time.
No, that's right. I'm eyeing Denise.
One more question. One more quick question.
One more question.
Time for that?
We go over to this side. Yep, one with Leslie. Run. Okay, maybe don't run. Sorry.
Hi, I'm Christelle. Thank you so much. I do have a really quick one. I had read that when you're trying to do the reasoning with your toddler to actually get down on their level, sort of, so instead of standing over them, do you find that that technique works a lot better?
Well, it depends on when you say reasoning, do you mean when we're coaching them through it?
Yes.
Is that kind of what you
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I try to save the getting down on their level to that moment when I'm going to be using that one sentence. Now I'm talking about tantrums. I'm not saying my child's being disobedient and ignoring me. In that case, a whole other strategy. If this is a full-on tantrum, they've lost the plot, they're screaming, they're crying, there's no getting through to them, then this is when we start to teach self-regulation by regulating our own behavior. And absolutely, so the moment that your toddler, it escalates, and now they're breathing heavy and they're catching their breath, absolutely you want to get at their level, even kneel down on the floor next to them, give them a quick hug, a quick cuddle. Absolutely. So getting on their level is definitely, like even if you find that your child is being really defiant, resisting you, any kind of disconnection, any kind of resistance, I would always recommend first and foremost getting on their level and reminding them that we're equals. I'm not here to control you. I'm not here to change you. I'm here to be with you and to coach you through this. So that's a great question, and you should probably come up here and tell everyone about how you get on the floor with them. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, I'm sorry, but we do have to wrap up the questions now. So I'd just like you to join me in thanking Stephanie for such a great presentation. Thank you.